celebrate the independence of this country. We also celebrate 60 years of the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and so much other stuff is happening. As we meet, let us focus on the charge and mission of this commission to improve the outcomes for everyone in the city. A moment of silence, please. Thank you. The agenda will proceed. The next item on the agenda is a period of public comment. Is anyone signed up for comment? Is there any public comment to be made? Please.
Good afternoon.
If you come to the mic.
We don't have it.
Well, can we use? Please identify yourself and.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amber Campbell Moore, and I am a representative of the Charleston Area Justice Ministry. And I just wanted to come and make comment regarding the recent release of the Charleston Police Department's final, and I'll say that in air quotes, report. We definitely have some concerns regarding the apparent finality of it and its lack of mention of it actually being a racial bias audit. They have consistently within the report disregarded that particular fact, and also abdicated the community engagement basically to CPAC. And so we just have some concerns and hope to be able to have some further discussion regarding the report in and of itself, and hopefully get some debate and hear from you all as well, if you all have any thoughts regarding the report itself.
All right, thank you. As part of our response to the public comment section, we don't have interaction, but discussion about the ERA report will be discussed later in the agenda. Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to make public comment? If not, I'll pass on. Well, the next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from our June 13th work session. We had rather lengthy conversation. In my review, the minutes suggest that they don't quite capture some of the ideas, but I'd like us to go through a discussion. So a motion to defer the adoption of these minutes.
Second.
I
can make a motion to defer.
Yes, please.
I'll make a motion to defer the minutes.
Motion appropriately moved and seconded to defer the adoption of the minutes. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same option. Any abstentions? So ordered. I'll defer on my chairperson's report because I'm actually comments because I'm really interested in hearing the presentation. So, Adrian, would you introduce our presenters, please?
So first presenter is Dr. Hanks and Krista. Krista is the manager. Dr. Hanks is a surgeon over at the Medical University of South Carolina. Just quickly about not just MUSC, because they have a program over there that's, I have a bias towards it because I think it's dynamic. So the MUSC Health Turning the Tide Intervention Program is a violent intervention patient advocate where they provide care and wraparound services to violently injured patients treated at MUSC Health. The program is based on a public health model that recognizes a complex interpersonal, social, economic, and environmental roots that causes violence. It is trauma-informed, patient-centered program designed to include healthcare and community resources to inform intervention and support services to the victims of violence. And so Dr. Hanks, if you would come up, Krista, and if we could get the PowerPoint presentation up. You're welcome. You just click, but he's going to set it up for you.
Fantastic. Thank you all for having us. I literally just ran out of the ICUs. Thanks for my informal appearance.
Excuse me, just a second. Do we have a mic? Going to make sure this can capture the public. And one of the wonderful things about having these presentations that allows us to educate the public about these programs. So we want to make sure that everyone can hear you.
Yeah, we can see it.
Like that. Why don't you tell us about your day? Crazy day?
Yes.
Abnormal day?
Super busy every summer. People doing all kinds of crazy things. And I guess before I start, I am Dr. Meek. I'm a trauma critical care and burn surgeon, and I'm also the injury prevention researcher. And I founded and act as the medical director for our hospital-based violence intervention program that has been in existence now for 3 years. And I'd love for Krista to introduce her.
Hey, everyone, I'm Krista Green. I'm the program director for Turning the Tide. And as Dr. King said, the program is about 3 years old now. And we cover both adult and pediatric trauma here in downtown Charleston.
Thank you. All right. And so I'm just going to jump right in, and some of this you all will probably know. I think it's really important to get the foundation of the problem, both nationally, but really in our locale. This is the area that we serve. Firearm injury became the leading cause of death for children in the United States about 3 years ago. It surpassed automobile injuries. Contrary to what happens in the adult population, the leading cause of intent is homicide among children and adolescents. And unfortunately, we see significant disparities in our country and in our region as homicides disproportionately impact young Black males significantly more than other groups of our population. So South Carolina, see if I can get this to work here.
Clicking.
Do I need to point it somewhere?
Right.
Doesn't seem to be working.
It's not working.
Or if you want to, I can tell you when to scroll through if you'd like.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's giving me a red sign here. Beautiful. Okay. And so to really hone in on South Carolina, we have a problem in our state. You know, I think a lot attention in the news and in the media is focused on cities like St. Louis and Chicago. And yes, they have very high rates of gun violence. But when you look at states that have the highest rates of firearm homicide, they are in the Southeast: Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, South Carolina, behind the District of Columbia. And so we have a problem here, okay? And it wasn't just in the setting of COVID and political unrest where we and other states saw significant rises in gun violence. This was happening in our state for the decade before. Our rate almost doubled in the decade before COVID. So we have been having a problem here for a very long time. And our pediatric firearm death rate is significantly higher than the United States. Next slide, please. And so I want to really focus too on some of the racial disparities that we see that I've already hinted to. And so this data, just to kind of orient everyone, is from the Violent Death Reporting System. South Carolina contributes data on every violent death to the Centers for Disease Control. And so this data is captured in vital statistics by the CDC. And they collect a host of data, but what you see here is the rate of gun homicides among Black individuals in South Carolina compared to other ethnic groups. So we have a significant disparity here. Next slide. And it's certainly not just among men, it is among women too. And so if you really want to get even more hyper-local, I'll show you a little bit of our more local regional data. You can go to the next slide. And this is again breaking down the homicide problem among youth, right? And so I mentioned before that suicide disproportionately impacts adults, although that has been narrowing with a larger portion of intents due to homicide among adults. about 60% of firearm deaths that are occurring in our state among youth are homicides. Next slide. And so when you look at our region, so this is our low country region, and again, this is data from our South Carolina National Violent Death Reporting System. When you look at our region in the Tri-County area and the low country, Charleston County comprises about 2/3 of all pediatric firearm deaths. And most of those, again, are homicide. Black children experience a firearm death rate 42% higher than white children. Yes.
Classified pediatric as 18 and younger.
So actually, we classify it in the National Violent Death Reporting System as under the age of 19. So really comprising teenagers. And of course, if you, and it makes sense, right? Most of these homicides especially are occurring among adolescents and teens. Next slide, please. And so I like to really pause on this because we talk a lot about the death and the problem here, which is pretty profound in South Carolina with the rates of homicide. But for every person that is shot in an act of assault, another 4 to 5 people survive, right? Patients and members of our community, right, are bearing the wounds and the lifelong trauma of violent injury. So it's not just disability, pain, ongoing medical needs, right? It is the PTSD, the psychological trauma, the loss of participation in school, loss of participation in the workforce, what it means to their family and their caregivers, but also what it means for a community, right? Neighborhoods that are traumatized by violence, what that does also to local businesses and people that might want to invest or disinvest from neighborhoods that have high rates of crime, right? And so the lasting impacts are profound. And it's intergenerational, as we all know. Exposure to violence in the home begets more violence very frequently, right? And so an individual that experiences violence, the impact is all around them. Next slide. And so I think it's really important, and a lot of you probably already know this, because I think that the story about violence becomes oversimplified. This is the reason, that is the reason, to really satisfy people's beliefs or what they want to do or not do about violence, right? It is complex, right? We know there are a number of associations and risk factors to experiencing violence, and some of them overlap with suicide. But importantly, right, there's nothing about race that confers a risk of violence. It is what has happened in someone's life and in their community, the systems and the policies around, right? And a lot of it has to do with what's happened in their home, what they've been exposed to as children, what is going on in the neighborhood, right? But we know places that, for instance, have poor social mobility, economic mobility, and low social capital. That is directly correlated with risk of violence, right? Community crime, neighborhood disparity, right? So it is the home, the immediate neighborhoods, and then also certainly policies, right? We've got a lot of great data that demonstrates there are certain firearm policies, for instance, that do confer safety and do help reduce rates of homicide and suicide and unintentional injury, right? In addition to easy access to firearms for high-risk people, right? So the problem is complex, which means there usually are complex solutions. Again, people like to oversimplify this. Next slide, please. And I really like to talk about how those things matter in our community. And so what you're looking at here is the peninsula, obviously, our home. The Area Deprivation Index is an index that was created out of indices of income, education, housing quality, employment. And so it's really meant to go to the block level and break down areas of disadvantage or deprivation, right? And so the deep reds are the most deprived areas compared to your dark blue. And so in the upper neck of the peninsula going into North Charleston, obviously, you've got a lot of very disadvantaged block groups, in addition to some places down here and in West Ashley. According to our National Violent Death reporting system that is reported by DHEC, it's probably hard to see for you guys, but what you're looking at here are our homicide rates. This deep blue area correlates directly with these areas of deprivation. And this is not a coincidence. We have a number of studies that show in areas of deprivation, vulnerability down to the neighborhood level are far more likely to experience violence, in addition to a host of other poor health and social outcomes. Next slide. So How does a doctor deal with this, right? Typically, our job that people think is, I take care of the person in front of me, our team fixes their wounds, gets them better, and then sends them out the door. However, we would be ridiculed and actually probably fined by CMS. We would be slapped on the wrist for very poor care if we did the same thing for someone that had a heart attack, right? If we just treated their heart attack and did not address their smoking, their eating, are they able to afford their medicine, right? What is going on that has put them at risk of this chronic disease and this poor outcome? And for the longest time, we have not addressed violence in the healthcare system. And quite frankly, in a lot of our public healthcare systems, we have not addressed it as truly a potentially intervenable public health problem. So that is where we come in with our hospital-based violence intervention program. Next slide. So I think this is an overly simple definition of it, but basically hospital violence intervention programs are meant to intervene when someone has had a traumatic incident. You can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. When someone has had a traumatic incident and essentially disrupt that cycle of violence for them by providing the right people at the bedside to support them and connect them to resources that help address their risk factors and underlying root causes of violence. And it has to be trauma-informed, culturally competent, individualized to that person and their family, and I think really importantly, provided by the right people. And I'll show you a couple of people that are members of our team because they come from the neighborhoods and some of which are survivors of violence themselves to help serve our patients. Next slide, please. And so in the model, right, if someone comes in and is injured, right, this is potentially a life-altering, critical, teachable moment, right, where you survive an injury. And we have client advocates that are part of the team. They receive pages like I do to respond to the trauma bay and to help be there as a part of the healthcare team to provide empathy, support, liaise with our clinical team, and ask the questions, what is it that I can do to help you right now? How can I help keep you safe? How can I help you and your family? And to provide them that immediate support. But it does not stop there. We enroll people for long-term follow-up up to a year to really help get to the root of what is potentially putting them at risk, but then also to help them recover, right? Some of our patients do not have many risk factors for violence. Right? We are all very aware of public incidents of violence where people are bystanders. They are walking down the street. They are at the beach, right? And they might not have a lot of those risk factors I mentioned, but this is the nature of our society now. We take care of them too, because ultimately we want them to recover. This is an optional, service. And so some of our patients decline, but we still try to connect them with resources and we leave an open door and say, if you ever change your mind and you want our help, call us back. Next slide, please. And so we focus on people between the ages of 12 to 30. That is the majority of community and interpersonal gun violence that we see is among adolescents, teens, and young adults. We focus on individuals that live in our Tri-County area because our team is going to their school, is going to their home, is taking them to their mental health appointments, right? And we can't do that in, Beaufort and Georgetown, other places that we do get patients from. And we focus mostly on gunshot wounds because that's the majority of severe violently injured patients that we see, unfortunately. But we will enroll people who are stabbed and have other mechanisms of assault. And then we also will enroll high-risk youth. We've had some teenagers, for instance, come in, they've been in a car crash and lo and behold, they're in the trauma bay and a gun falls out of their pants. And you have to ask yourself, why does a 15-year-old have a gun? And frequently it's because they are in risky situations. They are fearful about their situations and they carry a gun for certain reasons. And so we want to try to capture them hopefully before an injury. And we're working on actually expanding our services to do that more in our healthcare system. Next slide. So these are a host, but certainly I would say a small list of the services that are offered. A lot of it is really getting to know the patients, doing needs and risk assessments with them, goal setting, and then putting an action plan together, helping people get GEDs, helping people get enrolled back in school after they recover from their injury, making sure they get their mental health services, occupational therapy. We connect people to employment. We support their families. We've had some of our staff help go to the animal shelter to get someone's dog back after they were shot, right? And in the hospital for a long time, you name it, whatever it is that we can help support people to get back on their feet, but then also hopefully address their risk factors and break those cycles of violence. Our team helps do. Next slide, please. And so these are our 3 client advocates that are getting these pages and arriving to the bedside. Chantel, Kat, and Keith. You guys have already met Krista. We've also added a fantastic clinical psychologist to our team that is providing dedicated psychological services for our victims of violence that we work with. And so we are very fortunate to have this fantastic team of people that we work with. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our implementation outcomes. So we've been in existence for 3 years, like I mentioned. Krista did a fantastic job doing an evaluation of what we've done back in December. And so by that time, we had served over 360 patients. At this point, we have helped over 470 patients, which means even more family members. And that immediate bedside support in the hospital. And this breaks down where they come from. And so it mimics those other maps that I showed before. Most are coming from the upper neck of the peninsula that goes into North Charleston, West Ashley, and then the downtown Charleston area. Most are young, most are Black males. Next slide, please. When you look specifically at the people that have enrolled for services, now it is over 160 that we have enrolled for that long-term intensive follow-up. Slightly younger, just under 20 years old. Again, mostly non-Hispanic Black males. But what you see though, it's actually about 20% are female. We've seen an increase in females being injured in interpersonal and community violence. And I'd like to comment on this too. To keep track of their traumatic history, their exposures, some of their risk factors, these are mostly kids in our community. So 2/3 of these individuals have a family member or friend who's been a victim of gun violence. 1/3 have previously been a victim of violence. And about 1/2 report regularly carrying a firearm. So a lot of our teenagers, especially who are shot, are living in an existence of fear. And they frequently will carry firearms because they think that gun will help them. And so the cycle is pretty pronounced in our patient population. And a lot of them leave the hospital and still feel very fearful, as you can imagine, after they've been shot. The most common services that we have provided are related to school and education, helping people complete their education, housing, safe and stable housing, mental health services, employment, vocational training. And one thing I haven't mentioned is retaliation suppression. As you can imagine, a lot of our patients, really no matter what age, are very angry when they have been shot and their family members have been shot. And they will sometimes vocalize, I can't wait to get back at that person, right? And so our team focuses a lot on trying to quell that anger and remind them that their lives will be a lot worse and their community's lives will be a lot worse with the decision to retaliate. And so a lot of our work is in retaliation suppression that then extends into the community. And we have partners in CPD. We've reached out to North Charleston Police Department, right? If there have been true threats of violence that seem actionable to help provide intervention in the community as well. Next slide. And so you might be wondering, okay, this all sounds great. This seems really wonderful. What evidence is there for hospital violence intervention programs? Well, we are the only one in existence in South Carolina. There are not many across the Southeast because frankly, there is not as much investment in violence prevention and intervention compared to a lot of states in the Northeast and in the West. One of the gold standard programs was established at San Francisco General Hospital, and they have robustly studied their program in addition to a few other places. So studies have found that after the implementation of these programs, violent injury recidivism, experiencing a repeat violent injury, decreases from around 16% to less than 5%. And that's been replicated in multiple studies because the leading cause of death for a young person who has been shot in the next 5 to 10 years is being shot, right? They've already demonstrated they are higher risk. So if we can intervene, right, we can help reduce that. They're demonstrated increased connection to services like mental health and employment services, decreased rates of PTSD, and they are cost effective to healthcare systems. Other studies have also shown that these programs help keep people out of the criminal justice system. And so we're very fortunate and excited because we just got a grant to study our program in a very robust way that will look at some of these things in addition to a number of other outcomes that we think that our program provides to our patients and our families. Next slide. So I really like to then comment on the fact that, you know, these outcomes are really great, but what we appreciate in the hospital and at the bedside is a lot of our patients say, oh my gosh, I actually feel like someone cares about me. Because as much as we think healthcare is empathetic and understanding, there's a lot of bias that victims of violence are exposed to, right? What were you doing? You must have been doing something wrong when you got shot, right? The list goes on. And that can sometimes very much be conveyed at the bedside in the healthcare system. And I think our team has helped do that directly and by helping to educate our learners, our medical students, our nurses, all of the people that are providing care at the bedside. If you just click ahead, we've actually had patients say things like, I actually have felt like a person here. You're the only adult that has ever showed up for me and said you were going to, you know, you actually did what you said you were going to do. Because so many of our kids, especially, come from incredibly broken homes where they have not had reliable adults and love, and to teach them that their lives matter. So this is hard to study, but we know that this is happening in a lot of our patients, a lot of our community members' lives. Next slide, please. You can go ahead. And then the last thing I'll leave us on the next slide is really how hospital violence intervention programs fit into a larger schematic of violence intervention. So you haven't heard me talk about really policy other than, you know, it is related to certain outcomes in our communities that have more robust, safe firearm related policies versus those that don't. Because we know this is a complex problem, right? It can't just be about one policy or another. It can't just be about one evidence-based program, not others, right? And so this is from the Centers for Disease Control when they released a report recognizing our increasing rates of firearm violence and what can actually be done, right? Aside from firearm-related policy, to really help reduce violence and to also help survivors thrive. And they're related to things that I mentioned before related to social determinants of health. Neighborhoods, right? Employment, economics, livable wages, making sure children are in safe places while their parents work, housing assistance, cleaning vacant lots in neighborhoods. We have case control trials that show in urban areas that have high rates of violence, cleaning up neighborhoods and improving the physical environment reduces violent crime. There are studies that show this, right? And then for those at greatest risk, like my patients and people in our communities that are getting shot, programs like our hospital violence intervention program, advocating for safe firearm storage, which we do a lot in the healthcare system too, especially in families that have kids or people who are going through a mental health crisis, right? These matter. But there's a lot of other entities. This is the Council on Criminal Justice, which is an awesome resource for cities to help put together strategies to reduce violence. They recognize programs like our own as one of the few evidence-based violence intervention programs in communities. And some of you probably already heard that in the last couple of weeks, our Surgeon General released the first report recognizing gun violence as a public health crisis because it is a leading cause of death for youth and young adults in our country. And so we are grateful to be here. We're grateful to serve our community. I'll let Krista add anything, but I just think it's wonderful to extend the opportunity to be here. I think people often view, you know, okay, well, you're in the hospital, you're in the healthcare system, you know, you're not really part of the community, but these are our community members and we are out and about trying to address things for our patients in the community. But it also means that other things need to happen, right? In the physical environment, improving things related to disparities, right? Because those things do correlate with violence, especially in our high-risk neighborhoods. And we certainly welcome support, right? And investment, because we view ourselves as a part of the solution, which is complex. Krista, do you have anything to add?
So commissioners, you have questions?
Yes.
Tom?
One thing that we could do is permission, and one thing that is an individual.
As a commission, And maybe, I don't know enough, so this might be out of your scope, but I hope not. There are a number of cities that have put together offices of violence prevention, right? They don't live within the police department, although, you know, public safety is a part of that stakeholder group. But there are dedicated individuals and offices for violence prevention that really bring together, right, entities that represent all of these strategies. And for the city to have an action plan, right? I think so much gets put on the police department. And it's quite honestly not realistic, it's not fair, and it's not reasonable, right? You can't prevent all violence when part of what contributes to it is things like jobs and education and improving the physical environment, right? And so they are part of the solution, but there are so many other things. And so that's where these offices of violence prevention can be very impactful. And there are great examples in other cities that I'd be happy to distribute to see what entities like this are doing. And we certainly welcome support for programs like our own. We are funded only on things like grants, philanthropy, federal grants. We literally just piece together anything possible to help fund our work. There are some cities that support hospital violence intervention programs and other evidence-based strategies. There are some community-based services that are rooted in evidence and structure, and some that are not, quite frankly. And I think it's incredibly important for taxpayer dollars to go with things that have, you know, a demonstration to actually make a difference. And I think it's important for there to be structure around that, and that's where these commissions can help. What you can do, if any of you have guns, please don't store them, keep them in your car. I think that's an easy sell, right? We invited someone from CPD to be here, and he was going to come, but then had a family situation. One of the things that we've been working on a task force with other groups has been focused actually on firearms being stolen from cars. It is a profound problem in our community, and they will say when they recover guns from crime scenes, right? A lot of these guns are being stolen from cars by teenagers, high-risk individuals, and then they are being used for crimes. And I don't think a lot of our community members understand that, and part of responsible ownership is not storing your firearm where someone else can get it easily that will use it to harm another person or themselves. And that is an easy step.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You said that your funding is cobbled together from federal grants and other opportunities that pop up. What about the state? What level of funding do y'all get from the state?
So there's very little funding from the state of South Carolina for violence prevention and intervention that's outside of public safety. So just this last year was the first time that we had, I guess now who knows what's happening there. They did have basically seed grants that were available, and we were the recipient of one of them. I think they funded 5 groups across the whole state at the tune of what, $40,000 a year, very small amounts of money. And so there have been legislators across the state that have been very interested in a proposed legislation to more robustly fund grant opportunities from the state for programs like ours and others. And that just hasn't moved very much. Very ridiculous.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hank. I've been,
Your mic.
oh, sorry. I've been hearing your name in awe, actually, ever since we had Dr. Wendy Stiver here as our first procedural director. And so I'm wondering, listening to you, the compelling messages that you're, bringing to the way that you're organizing your volunteers that are going to follow along with these kids after their incidents. And do you have like an ambassador program or anything that would go into the churches or the other community, civic organizations to enlist their help and, educate them to this extent?
Yeah, I don't know, Krista, if you want to talk to our community engagement. And just to clarify, our team are paid. They have a hard job. And they need more money, they are doing God's work.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, I also want to emphasize, these are full-time MUSC employees that are doing this work. This work should not be voluntary. Or there are a lot of community members that do gun violence prevention work out of the goodness of their heart, but this is public health work and it should be funded. And so I do really want to emphasize that they are MUSC employees. They are part of the clinical team. But in regards to integrating and engaging with our community partners, we have both an internal and an external stakeholder group, and our external stakeholder group meets quarterly. And it's just that, our external stakeholders. So all of the services we talked about providing, housing, employment, voc training, GED programs, mentorship programs, other community-based organizations that are youth-focused, law enforcement, the school system, I could go on and on. They are all involved there, and we meet quarterly and then communicate offline in between those meetings to keep abreast of what everyone's doing. And the goal there really is, our desire is to build an ecosystem, because turning the tide can't solve the gun violence problem in the Charleston area alone, nor are we designed to, right? And so we have to have a lot of folks sitting at the table working together. And like a lot of large community-wide problems, it's very easy to work in silos. And so our external stakeholder group is really helpful in trying to break down some of those silos, improve communication, because at the end of the day, we all have the same goal, even if we're targeting it from a different perspective. We do engage with multidisciplinary teams then also internally. So we have our chaplaincy program at MUSC. We have social workers and case managers. We have our clinical team. We have our hospital security and our public safety officers. They are all involved. And so this really is a holistic approach when we're caring for our patients and families. And we're really looking at all of the things that are going on behind the scenes, because the reality is, when it comes to our health outcomes, only about 20% of what's influencing those health outcomes can be attributed to the healthcare that someone receives. And so all the other 80% is those socioeconomic programs, those safety net programs, right? Access to safe housing, right? Reliable transportation, health insurance, all of those things. And so we really do take a multidisciplinary approach to engage there. And Dr. Hink also mentioned the study that we're doing, and that's also really trying to elevate our patients and our community's voices too, about how can we improve, what is the impact of our program on things that may be important to them that we haven't thought about, and how do we measure that? So we're also really trying to uplift our patients and community's voices in that respect as well, so that we can improve, again, not only just turning the tide, but the other stakeholders at the table as well can learn from that too.
Thank you.
A question. So quick question, Krista, so we've been in conversation, but what do you see in the scope of your work? How do you see the city playing a part?
Yeah. Dr. Hink alluded to this already, but the city is a partner in this work, right? They are a valuable stakeholder in this work, and they have a lot of power and opportunity to influence what the other stakeholders can do. The reality is that funding is a massive barrier to this work. Gun violence prevention work is grossly underfunded compared to the scope of the problem. It's the leading cause of death of children, and yet we are an externally funded program relying on grants year to year, right? And so the city has a really powerful opportunity to, one, be a thought leader in this space, right? And to say that this is not acceptable for our community. We don't want our children to grow up where they are fearful, not of a car crash or a freak accident, but of getting shot, right? And so the city has an opportunity to be a leader as well as a partner with those that are already doing the work. I think really relying on and trusting those that are experts in the public health space and the gun violence space, and giving them the tools to do the work that they're already trying to do, while also then contributing resources that we may not have access to, but the city does because of their position within the government. Yeah. We're working on it.
If I might.
Yes, yeah.
So, the police department, Dr. Hanks, by the way, thank you for this excellent presentation. Dr. Hanks mentioned, working with the police department around questions of, guns being left in cars. I know that the police department is initiating, a problem-oriented policing issue. They have articulated as the, Charleston County Coordinating, Justice folks that these guns are a problem. So are you actively involved in the development of a module inside that $800,000 project to specifically address this?
Do you want to speak to that? Because I'm not. No,
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
The other question, the Health Advisory Committee of the city, you guys been regularly presenting to them, and have they been an advocate for you? Right. So just as a commercial, we are scheduled, Councilperson Shealy, who chairs that committee, has agreed for HARP to present, I believe at the August meeting. And I think it would be a good opportunity for us to look at for more intersections in this regard. Are there other questions? Yes, sir. Jason?
Yes, I have a question. And I think I know the answer, but you mentioned that in follow-up with these gun violence victims, that basically they have the option of enrolling or not. But for those that enroll, the program goes on for basically 1 year. And this is kind of serendipity, but I'm reading a book right now, The Unstoppable Brain, and by someone with the same letters as behind their name as you do, MD, MPH, and it talks about the fact that of iteration and habits, and it talks about the fact that if you really don't stay with whatever issue you're trying to deal with, whether it's addiction, dieting, whatever, for 1 year, or more than 1 year, you're really not going to have a long-lasting impact. So I'm guessing it's 1 year because that's all the money you really can put into that portion of the program.
I'll
Thank you.
also add that our client advocates are trained so that, in the beginning, after someone is shot, we're sort of in this crisis period, right? So the client advocate is heavily involved providing intensive case management services. But over time, we are empowering and educating our patients and families on how to access services and resources independently. So as the crisis subsides and the dust settles and they're able to more independently access services, their housing is stabilized, their employment is stabilized, so on and so forth, then they are given the tools to be able to continue to access those services even without the client advocate. So part of the client advocate's role is saying, hey, you're in a crisis right now and you need help, but the goal is that you'll be able to do this for yourself by the time we're done here, and we won't let someone go until they feel ready to let go.
So members of the commission, we could probably continue this conversation while we have other items on the agenda. Thank you very much again for an excellent presentation. And thank you for what you do for this community. Our second presentation, and I hate to tell Jerome he's going to get squeezed on this. Jerome Smalls from the CPD Youth Outreach Programs. And let's try and keep this to 15 minutes, guys.
Okay, I'll make it quick. And I also wanted to respond really quickly to some of the things that were mentioned in the previous presentation. They're absolutely correct. Other cities are doing this work. I'm tangentially in this work as well as we think about our youth outreach from CPD side of things. We just actually visited Boston. They have a very successful mayor-led initiative around community safety, and they work with their hospital, which is also a university hospital, and community-based organizations. Their murder rate, I think, is at 5 right now, and the population is 650,000 people. So there's something in the water, it's working, and they do a lot of that community-based organization stuff with the police department. So I just wanted to emphasize that. As well as the city of Columbia has a violent crime
Jerome, you want
office.
to formally introduce yourself?
Yeah, my bad. I was just wanting to get that out there before I rush through my presentation really quickly. So my name is Jerome Smalls. I serve as the developer of youth outreach for the police department. I've been working with the city of Charleston for about a year. Before I was at the police department, which I started in January, I was actually in the mayor's office under Mayor Tecklenburg. I'm from North Charleston, born and raised. I was in DC for about 7 years, and I returned home last year, and it's been really amazing and beautiful to serve my city in such a way. And so with the police department now, I started in a new role for me and also for the police department as a developer of youth outreach. So Chief Walker tells me all the time, Jerome is a whiteboard, and I've been putting my expo marker to work and building the plane while flying it. But my background's in education. I got my master's in education, so this is very much aligned. Law enforcement is new, but trying to make it work with what I know. And we can go to the next slide, please. And so what I want to talk to you all today is about one of the many initiatives on that whiteboard that is brand new for the city of Charleston, specifically the police department, which this summer, literally a month ago, we hosted our Youth Citizens Academy. For those of you who don't know, we have a Citizens Academy where adults can come for 8 weeks and you learn about the police department. I took that as an idea and we did one for our young people. The reason being, and why this was important is because we actually do a lot of programming in the police department with our youth over the summer, specifically through Camp Hope, but it stops at around 14 years old. So we don't have a lot of outreach programs directly targeted to our high school age kids who, as we know, the data shows, whether we're thinking about MUSC data or also crime data, tends to be the ones who are getting more involved with our interactions with police. So creating something for our young people was paramount. And so today I'm going to overview that program. I'm going to give you some numbers on it. I'm going to show you some programming highlights. And at the end of the camp, the students actually gave recommendations to the police department. So I'm going to share some of those recommendations that they gave. And then from that, I'm going to take some time to show what I'm thinking about as far as next steps goes. Sound good? All right, cool. Next slide. Next slide, I think. So overview and vision, next slide. A lot of words, basically is what I just said. The Youth Citizens Academy was a 1-week camp specifically for high school kids. And what we did was we showed them the police department and what we do at the police department, from forensics to take them to our virtual simulator. And I'll talk about more about that in a second. But I was very specific and intentional about making sure there was time for them to have tough conversations, sometimes with police presence, sometimes without police presence, and we relied on some of our community-based organizations to come in and guide some of those conversations. And the idea being that by the end of the week, not only were they giving a recommendation, but they were giving an informed recommendation. So next slide. So our purpose, I'm gonna just read these 4 bullet points. First one was to increase youth understanding of law enforcement's role in the criminal justice system, empower youth as content experts of their own experience, and solicit feedback for CPD, unpack challenges between wounded communities and law enforcement. And that wounded communities, I went to a conference earlier this year, and we talk about the difference between wounded and at risk. At risk means that you're liable to something happening to you or doing something. Wounded in this context is talking about kids who have already had something happen to them, right? That trauma that has wounded them. And the last one says, serve as an alternative to juvenile detention and rehabilitation. That's like the big goal. Next slide. And last thing I'll also say, I've been working with Mika and a few others in the mayor's office and recreation. Our goal is to kind of, and I got an education background, a marketing background. I realized we do a lot in the city for our young people, and I think we could better brand it as how we communicate specifically to the high school population. So right now we're working with this working title of Your City, Your Summer. And the idea is that not necessarily creating new things, but how do we align the things that we do over the summer to be appealing to our young people, particularly our young people who are a little bit harder to reach than some of our go-getters. And now I'm gonna show you some quick numbers. So it's a little hard to read, but I went to all the high schools in the city and I tabled. I interacted directly with about 100 young people. We posted this on social media. Live 5 News heard about it. So there's a lot of publicity and marketing around it. So the young people had to apply themselves. It's all about giving them agency. So I had about 22 young people apply. 12 of them confirmed that they were going to come, and only 7 of them actually attended, which actually ended up working out pretty well as the pilot. And 3 of those 7 were Charleston residents. So just to kind of give you a sense of the funnel. Direct hours, the program was from 9 to 3:30 for 4 days, 26 hours of direct contact. 15 of our officers were involved and about 3 professional staff. Total cost through the Lens Foundation, we actually incentivized them with $50 gift cards. So that was the big bulk of the budget, plus food. So that came out to a total cost around $257 per youth. So here were some quick highlights. This was the schedule. It was a little hard to read, but it was 4 days, very in-depth. One of the biggest feedbacks we got from the parents was that they knew the schedule beforehand. We adhered to the schedule. So this is where my type A-ness really kicked in and held us true. But as you can see, the green was where I kicked out the officers. So we had safe spaces for the kids to talk about it without officer presence. But we also had a lot of human exchange, and we're going to see that in a few. And then we did a lot of field trips. The third day we went to our virtual simulator, and the kids actually utilized the virtual simulator that our officers use when training, and they got to literally walk into their shoes. The third day they loved it. We went to forensics, and then we also did CPR training. They didn't get certified, but they do know the basics. And then the last day was a big kind of graduation. Friends and family were there. They presented their recommendations, and it was a great event. Next slide. First day, Chief Walker opened it up. This was very much so conversation heavy, setting the tone. But actually it went really well. I was a little nervous. The kids started talking, and even our officers started sharing stories that I didn't even hear them say. And we really created a vulnerable space for that humanity to be exchanged between officers and youth. Next slide. Second day was that virtual simulator, like I said. And then we came back and we gave a substantial amount of time for them to start processing their recommendations and what they were going to share. Next slide. And understanding perspectives of the officers. Third day was really just field trips. Like I said, we went to forensics. You can see the pictures here. Forensics recreated a whole crime scene for them. They got to see the ballistics lab. They got to see the fingerprinting. And actually, some of the kids are actually considering professions in law enforcement. And you're going to see some of the quotes of how they felt about police before this. And it was a really powerful 4 days. Next slide. And then the last day was all presentation heavy. We had people from the Lens Foundation, officers, and another community-based member judging their presentations. 2 young people actually ended up winning, and we gave them additional $50 gift cards. We actually had one young lady made a video of her experience throughout the whole thing, and that's on our social media platforms. And we also had someone present on mental health and suicide prevention. Next slide. So now we get into the meat and potatoes. So our youth gave recommendations. I'm gonna go really quickly over this, but I'll share it with you, and I'll stop with the couple recommendations that are really powerful. This one, Gabe recommended that we have our officers just do more foot patrols and engage with our community more. Next slide. Tremaine ended up being one of our winners for her recommendation. Hers was the problem that she identified was that a lot of people don't respect police officers and see them as humans. Instead, they see them as robots or bad individuals, which is called dehumanization. So her whole thing was, what would it look like if officers and regular people walked through a flower field and they had to interview one another, and the citizens who best could answer the questions about the officer would get some type of incentive, a fruit bouquet of flowers. But it was really rooted in her own experience of feeling dehumanized. She said to love is to talk, find more, and to dig deeper. And she herself has been ostracized, and so she kind of related to our officers in that regard. Next slide. CJ's recommendation was that there's not enough safe spaces for youth. He said there's too much violence at public events where children are at risk of hurting or getting hurt by one another. I think that really ties into the presentation that we just heard from MUSC. His suggestion was, can the city pay for police to be present at youth spaces and youth events? And this was something that actually was a sentiment experienced by most of the young people. One example was Gabe said for his 16th birthday, he went to Stars and Stripes and realized that he couldn't go there unless you had an adult. And he didn't have an adult with him. It was all his 16, 17-year-old friends. So they couldn't go. He ended up eating dinner by himself on his birthday because of the fact that, you know, I guess Stars and Stripes has to pay for law enforcement, yada, yada, yada. So CJ's recommendation was that we would want youth spaces to be secure. If you know this is where young people gather, can CPD and police law enforcement be there to help make sure that it's safe for them? Next slide. Javon was our second winner. His recommendation was that there's not enough variety of consequences / types of alternatives for when youth make mistakes. A direct quote from him is, "This is a problem because when kids enter detention centers, it follows them forever." And so he actually had 3 recommendations. One was an alternative to detention. And actually said they should go to a program like the one that he experienced. What would it look like for kids to come to an environment where they can learn more about police, and that might shape the way that they see themselves as citizens? He also talked about one-on-one mentoring sessions, not directly with law enforcement, but with somebody to help them through their experiences. And then he talked about what would it look like for a consequence to be student-led community service projects. Next slide. Caden's recommendation was rooted in the fact that when he was younger, he was always scared of cops, and he believed that's because of how he was raised. And one of the problems that he identified was that parents teach their kids that they will be locked up by the police if they don't behave or do something bad. And that's something that our officers actually shared. They're walking around Target in uniform, and someone would tell their child, "You better act right or he's going to take you to jail." And then that gets compounded. And so Caden's recommendation was that can school resource officers actually come to PTA meetings and present to parents and teachers how to talk to the kids about police. Maybe the officers could visit the schools on the first day or during car ride or pickup and have talking points for parents. And the last thing he said was just officers visiting schools and speaking to students directly during like assemblies and things of that nature. Next slide. And then Deanna recommendation was really actually kind of aligned with Caden's, and she was saying how the problem is youth aren't getting a good image of the police at a young age, and relationships with police are not growing. She said, growing up, I saw the police as a threat, or as people who were waiting to take me to jail. And so when it came to her to speak to police, she was scared, which actually led to her acting out or making a scene. And this young lady is now actually considering a role in law enforcement. She was really motivated by what she was learning. But her recommendation was that if you got to make an arrest, scan the area to see if there's a young person present. And if that young person is present, CPD should be obligated to check in and explain what's going on, because if the young people are being told these people are going to lock you up for being bad, and they see a traumatic event where a loved one or a neighbor gets arrested, that imagination and that story continues to compound, and then you get teenagers who don't like police. And then she also recommended that the Youth Citizens Academy be something that we continue to do for other young people. And the last recommendation was from Sam. He didn't make it on the last day, but his recommendation was, can we get officers and counselors to go into schools and speak to students directly? Because a lot of young people are struggling with their mental health, and the officers aren't licensed, but they can be a space of refuge. And if you have a licensed professional there, and then officers who are also a part of that conversation, it may help break down some barriers and some stigma. So those are the recommendations. It's a lot, but the good news is that a lot of the recommendations that the young people suggested, we're already doing. 2 of those recommendations were to continue to do this pilot program that we started and to do it more in depth. And so it felt really good. And I told him, you're making my job easier, because now I got some things I can just go ahead and run with and say, this is what our youth want directly. Next slide for me. And these were our presentation winners. Like I said, Tremaine with her idea with the flowers and cops, and then Javon, who talked about having more alternatives for the consequences of the actions. And Javon actually was hit the nail on the head. He didn't even know it. So when an officer may arrest a young person, they actually have 3 choices they can do. They could send them to DJJ, they could send them back to their parents, or there is an option to do some form of alternative to detention. The problem is we don't have that infrastructure in the region. We don't have a substantial infrastructure. So oftentimes young people are just getting sent back home when they probably did something that deserves some form of a consequence beyond just going back to mom, or they're going straight to DJJ. And DJJ right now typically only accepts young people who are doing really violent crimes. So if you're doing anything in between, there really isn't a system of true accountability for our young people in that regard. So he actually hit the nail on the head without even knowing it. Next slide for me. Next slide. So this is quick feedback. Y'all can read it, but I think from parents. But the parents asked for it to be a little bit longer. They appreciated that it was on time. And they loved that the kids actually were able to do something like get CPR certified or do CPR classes. If it was longer, they would love for them to get kind of certified and things of that nature. Next slide. This is feedback from the students. They said they talked a lot, but it was worth it. One of them said, I like y'all. Everyone was so nice and gave me very good life advice. Sergeant Polite was very helpful as well. I assumed it was going to be a boot camp, but instead it was actually fun. I learned that people in the force have humanity and are not always bad people. Community policing to me means bonding with the community and gaining their trust. So this is the feedback from our young people. Next slide. One more. So looking ahead, these are the things that I'm taking from it. What I would love to do is, one, start implementing some of those recommendations where applicable. Luckily, Chief Walker was there, and we actually had DC, Deputy Chief Jenkins was there. Captain Mitchell was there. My lieutenant was there. So a lot of high commanding officers in the police department were there, and they were thrilled and very impressed by the youth recommendations. So I don't think it's going to be a hard sell for me when I come back with concrete action items for them. I also want to take Youth Citizens Academy on the road. So my goal is to think about what are some age appropriate workshops from 30 to 90 minutes that we could do with our elementary, middle, and high school students to increase access to what we talked about in that week. Make improvements to the planning and the curriculum of Youth Citizens Academy. We did it kind of last minute. I learned about it. I was like, all right, let's do it. And we kind of turned it around in like 2 months. So it was a little stressful, but with more time and with more insight, I think we can make it even better. I also want to host 2 of them next summer to expand access. And what you saw earlier, my goal is actually to make this some form of a year-round alternative to detention. I'm already in talks with CCSD. We're thinking about if a young person gets suspended for 5 to 10 days, can this be something that they're mandatory to do? And then, you know, hopefully building conversations with DJJ as well. What does this look like as an alternative to detention? And yeah, questions?
Thanks, Jerome.
Yeah.
And I also want to thank the previous guests from MUSC. I didn't get a chance to thank you. This is really not a question. It's mainly just a comment and maybe a commentary on some things. So it seems to me in Charleston, you know, I worked for the school districts for 15 years. It seems like the services and the sports we have, particularly for elementary school kids, are pretty strong. We have after school programs, a lot of summer programs. As you progress into middle and high school, that's where we're losing these kids.
Yep.
So from a resource allocation standpoint, I would strongly encourage you and you all to really focus on that middle school particularly, because that's where, and I directed the after school programs for the district. A lot of support elementary, but when they get to that 6th and 7th grade, there's nothing. The other commentary I do want to make is I grew up in upstate New York, and the fields, the buildings, the schools, this is a school district thing, and you know, this is on them, and I've pressed upon them, were wide open during the summertime.
Yeah.
They were places of safety and refuge. We lock our places down here. And from a taxpayer perspective, we pay for the 1 cent sales tax that builds all these new schools. Parents should really push up against the school district to make sure that those buildings are open. Of course, they can't staff them, but they should be open, particularly downtown. Sanders, Clyde, Meminger, Mitchell, these schools should be open for kids. So I think part of the challenge is these middle schoolers don't have a place to go during the summertime.
And then they make places.
Right. And so so we've got to create this third space for them. And again, that's CCSD, that's conversations with the city. The last thing I wanted to say is as we mature as a group, I do believe in youth voice. There should be a youth spot here in our commission. And
Mhm.
I've said this before, if we get approved again and this matures, we should have a spot. We meet at 5 o'clock, so that shouldn't be prohibitive for any student, but it should be a high school kid that comes to these meetings and shares the perspective that we need to hear from. Because we need to be making decisions with them, you know, and not in their absence, so.
100%.
So-
And I would say one thing I'm very cognizant of is just trying to make sure that the police department is playing the proper role that it should be playing. I think it can be a slippery slope that being both the social worker and the people having to do the dirty business on people's worst days. And so just trying to balance that as well. But I couldn't agree with you more. With my education background, I agree, like schools are the heart of every community. And ways in which that we can think about that is paramount. And that's actually part of the conversation we've been having about next summer. We've been talking about camps, third spaces, internships, and some forms of just block party type situations where kids can just feel as though this city is theirs. And that's the whole idea of this notion of your city, your summer. Young people can't vote, but they deserve the voice and what
Last
the city
question.
says. Yeah.
Yeah, multi-pronged comment here.
Okay.
So you hit on something really important as part of your presentation, I think, which is making sure that y'all are going to places where kids are at, and because there are places where kids are gathering, they are finding that outlet and the safe space in the community, and it's a lot easier to find to access them as part of those programs than trying to recruit, I would imagine. I heard from both of these presentations, as you mentioned, alternative to detention at the end of your presentation, and Dr. Hanks with HVIP programs that are evidence-based, that work, that should be how we're spending a lot more of our tax dollars. From a state level, from a city level, I think we spend so much money on figuring things out once they're already off the rails, when we could be investing in evidence-based work like the work that you all are doing. So I think we need to figure out a way as a society, not necessarily as a commission, to make sure more dollars are going from our state and our local governments to programs like this. And you know, we got to invest in what already works. So like, there's a lot of good work happening in our city, and it's just, again, it's just not funded. So like, alternative to detention, there are some incredible programs happening through here in North Charleston, all over Charleston County and beyond, with amazing community leaders that just aren't being invested in any significant way by our government. And you know, in terms of these kids, like I work a lot with Edward Jones on the east side, and there are community leaders like him that aren't being paid in any way by local government, that are using local government facilities to provide free summer camps and sports leagues, and keeping kids busy and giving them positive mentors to interact with. So I would encourage our city to invest in some of those community grassroots efforts that are already taking place, and lend support that could make them even better from a professional perspective.
Thank you, Commissioner. Jerome, thank you very much. I had the opportunity to attend the opening session, a portion of the opening session on the first day. It was a remarkable experience hearing those young people talk. For the commissioners, the discussion about municipal resources, I did listen in on the ad hoc committee, budget committee report. Each of the departments are this month submitting their budget requests to the finance office. They will be smoked over during August, and the committee will begin its discussion in October and November. It is not beyond the pale, since we're supposed to be advisory, based on anything we've heard today, or will hear in the coming weeks, to pass on our advice regarding potential support for these initiatives. That is within our bailiwick, and it's early enough in next year's budget cycle for us at least to raise those questions.
And can I just plant a 1 seed to this commission? So one thing that I'm learning and realizing is we have a lot of obviously school resource officers. Our resource officers are trained very well in active shooter, how to handle young people tactically. And they also do a 4-day training with CCSD before they enter the schools. But there's a lot of gaps in the same type of training for social emotional learning, adverse childhood experiences, and the list goes on that our educators get that our officers don't get. And so I'm doing a listening session this year, and my goal is that with my role also being a way to help make more educators out of our school resource officers. So just planting that bug. I don't know if that overlaps with y'all's agendas, but I think that's something that can really benefit our young people, particularly our young people from different cultural backgrounds. So
And I want to take the
Yeah.
chair prerogative of the chair to make the last comment. I did invite Mindy Strom, the director of the Office of Youth and Family, to come today because the discussion that we're having obviously covers a number of areas. And her economic, and you may have read in the newsletter, the economic empowerment workshops that are being given this week and next week for young people are an example of some of the summer activities that are going on that are underutilized. So much like in the area of violence intervention, the question of youth intervention perhaps needs to be rethought about how we package those things here in the city.
awesome.
And I look forward to
Thank
hearing
y'all.
more from you, Jerome. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Managers report.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hanks, Krista, and Jerome for your work. Just a high level due to the time frame. So what Jerry just mentioned, under our economic empowerment and youth and education falls the City of Charleston, bank-owned Charleston, providing a series of financial empowerment workshops for youth and young adults. They started their workshop this morning. It's an hour long. They have 2 other sessions. Those sessions will be covering building credit, investing and saving for retirement. They're virtual sessions, and I will send you the Google link as well after this meeting because I attached it to my document. Those sessions are July 18th and July 25th. The Racial Equity Core Team met on Tuesday. The departments who were present was HR, Stormwater, Traffic and Transportation, Planning and Preservation, Resilience and Sustainability, Recreation, Fire, and Cultural Arts. Those departments that did not attend did respond, but they had, however, they had other commitments. The Fire Department, Weeks, who is a personnel from fire, stated that the last cohort that they have is the most diverse cohort. They actually have 4 females. They have representation from the Latin community as well as African Americans who made it to the cohort. I do not have the final number of that cohort yet, but I will get that for you. I'm also working on a meet and greet with the mayor's office with the Equity Core team. And we went over in that meeting the mayor's priorities and how the team can align with certain initiatives. And we're still brainstorming through what those initiatives are. There have a meeting about the initiatives?
Yeah, they had the meeting with the mayor.
Not yet. Working on a meet and greet. Yes, ma'am. No problem. So we're working on that. And then there was a question at our last meeting about the citizen complaint process. There is a way to to submit a complaint. It's under the online services, under City Service Desk, and you will be able to make a request, and that states on that button, report a problem or register a complaint. And that way you can submit your complaint or you can reach out to the ombudsman. That information will be located when I send you this document as well, but that is all on the city website. Also working on the LEP plan with Deja. Deja is the Public Information Officer. The LEP plan, limited English proficiency. It will give way to more engagement in our city meetings when it comes to translators and those who need ADA accommodation. Also, and you can chime in if you'd like, Bonnie, but because I know she's had a portion of this as well. So we discussed with South Carolina Human Affairs Commission up in Columbia. There is a portion of it that we wanted to speak on when it comes to Community Relations Council. I am receiving a document from Danielle, which there is a couple of circles because some people were missing, some people transitioned out. We, in order, if we do decide to be a Community Relations Council, we have the number of representation because it only requires 5. The benefit of being that is that those councils that I've looked at around other areas, they can have sponsors, so which means that the council will have funding. And they also pick their leaders. So it's not a council pick. It is, they actually vet out who they want on the council. So the diversity is there. And that concludes my update. Does anyone have any questions?
Commissioners?
Are we gonna talk about that? I mean, this is just your update in
Mhm.
terms of the process we have to go through in order to
Yes.
decide about the United Human Relations.
Yes, we will.
Okay.
So,
All of my questions.
at the last meeting, Dr. Gilligard, presented a request for assistance on, placing the medallions. Did anything happen with that? Did you?
That request was made, the medallions, and then there was a letter request made. That has been determined by the mayor's office. And there was a meeting that the mayor held with Dr. Gilbert. So, I think that has transpired, that's outside of the purview of my review. But in terms of support, I do remember that Logan did offer support, and some sort of dialogue in person. But in terms of a letter, a broad letter, I don't think that was going to be satisfied. In that broad scope, not with the time. But she does have those information and those are always taking the talk. Next step.
She did communicate with me, this week. The directory is actually going to the printer, this week, so,
Yeah. I think that's what-
yeah.
for another reason.
Yeah, okay. And
Chair?
also,
I had spoken with her about, I guess, a week and a half ago to make sure that she was going to be able to get the plaques made because that was a funding deadline. And my understanding at that time, she thought that that had been resolved and they did have the funding in place to get the plaques made. In fact, I think it's getting about twice as many made. So that's going to give them a big leg up. And that was kind of that first deadline, I think,
yeah,
last I heard was it was looking good.
great. That's good news. That's good news. And my understanding, Adrian, is that the budget process has begun. Have you submitted a request or do we need to?
I meet with Logan on next week about the budget.
All right, so,
We'll get an updated.
yeah, but what we'll do is let's have a discussion about that at the next leads meeting
Sure.
on the budget.
Feels like this wasn't the first time the budget was discussed, so I found.
So, the question was, we've been talking about funding for the organization in 2020, current year, what we had available. All right, this discussion is about moving forward, the request for 2025, all right? Because the cycle, is beginning, all right, and it starts, or the HARC budget comes through the mayor's office. All right, so I just want to make sure that we. No. Okay, moving on to old business, BAR amendment discussion. Jason?
Saga continues. So we had a CD meeting, and I'll just report out that during that meeting, we did provide a recommendation, but based on the conversation and the nature of where that meeting was headed, I thought it'd be in our best interest to regroup and discuss it because I do think, we can talk about this at the next meeting, but just to give you all something to think about before we meet again and have a deeper dive, which is A, I do think that there's some appetite on council to repeal the 2017 ordinance, which removes BAR small north of Line Street. Just want to say that's an option. The other option is option 2 is we continue down the path of the tweaks that we were making around the ordinance, and Carol had some good suggestions on how to make those tweaks, but some of the sentiment I've heard offline and online is our recommendation didn't do enough. And I know this is just my opinion, that there's probably some appetite on council to have a deeper discussion and make more radical changes to that ordinance. So that's kind of where we are. I think I would ask that we come back next meeting and have that an agenda item and work through that, kind of workshop through that recommendation, what that's going to be like, whether that's going to be a deeper, more radical recommendation, or we just stick to the existing recommendation. But the reason I personally kind of held back and kind of pulled it off the table was I didn't want to do anything that I thought council members didn't have the appetite for, or they didn't think we were doing enough. So I want to try to get the pulse of some of the council members, and I have. So those are my comments.
Carol?
Thank you, Jason, for representing us. Like I said, I watched the movie twice just because it was very interesting. And I think you've captured it in terms of essentially the council members that are on the Community Development Committee of Council were sort of all over the place in terms of their understanding of what was already in place for one thing, what had been in place for another thing, and what was possible for a third thing. And I think maybe at least to get started while we're mulling over, what we would recommend, because that's the way the meeting left off, right? All they did was adopt a vote. They took a vote saying, we're sending this back to HARC for a more final recommendation, however they put it in the motion. I don't know. So I would hope that we could at least agree the reason that we're even putting this forward to the city council. It's a property issue. We wouldn't often be talking about property issues, except that the goal for this ordinance, in my opinion and understanding for the last year, is that we are trying to protect the last remaining percentages of Black property ownership in that part of Charleston, the historic neighborhoods above Line Street that still have, at least some portion of Black family ownership. And I don't want to lose sight of that goal in sort of the minutia of, well, can we tweak here and tweak there and tweak there? I think we can make recommendations that preserve that goal and then let the city figure out, what the details of the ordinance should actually say. I think they're trying to just, abdicate a little bit of detailed responsibility. And so that's what I have to say at this moment. I agree we shouldn't talk about it in any more detail until next month.
So we'll have that as an agenda item. My recommendation to other commissioners, I believe the meeting was June 20th. June 20th, I suggest that you listen to the discussion. You'll get the word gentrification was mentioned several times in that discussion. The suggestion of unintended consequences for the ordinance extending the BAR above Line Street was also mentioned. All right, so those are all questions that are on the table. In addition, the review of the municipal zoning code is underway. In that document, in the presentation, I believe it was on June 6th, there is in that slide deck a comment about equity, and it speaks to looking at the historic impact of code ordinances on again, unintended or intended consequences. So again, two pieces of homework to help provide us for background, if you will, being prepared to have the discussion. And I also will look and ask both Carol Jackson and Jason to see if there are other documents, right, that perhaps can provide some light for us so we can we're not being educated and learning the language going into the conversation, but are able to come up, have some proposal discussions. Okay. Thank you much on that.
Yeah.
Mhm. So that'd be, it's important to put those, Adrian, if you could highlight those YouTube
Yeah.
to folks
Doesn't matter.
as part of the minutes, that would be helpful. Anything else on housing, Carol?
I don't have anything specific for us to discuss, but I would just like to put forward another placeholder discussion, or at least an information session next month. I don't know how many of you saw that there were two stories, one in the Post and Courier on Sunday, June 16th, and then another one in the Post and Courier on July 2nd. And then the city paper covered the same topic, whenever, sometime in between those two dates, I think. And it's all focused on when Mayor Cogswell represented the city at a tri-county meeting on housing and community development, just for lack of a better remembrance of what that day was. He made a pronouncement that he was putting forward to the city a plan for how to handle the increasing numbers of homeless people that are sleeping outside overnight in our city. And so, to be honest, I was very concerned about the way that that was reported in terms of the overall framework for the plan. I'm happy to send a link for Adrian to send or I have a PDF, so it's really easy to read. And I'll highlight what I think the paper covered in terms of the mayor's plan as they wrote about it. But I was sure that there was something more, more formal than that. So I contacted Ms. Shaw Johnson, the director of the housing department, and she assured me that her staff are working on a more detailed formal plan. She's calling it the transition housing plan, that they are to deliver to the mayor. And her new supervisor is Tim Keene, who's the overall area section chief for planning and housing and a variety of other departments. And she was expecting to be able to deliver that probably the middle of next week. So sometime around the middle of July. And I don't know how long they will take to look at it without making it public, but I think certainly by the time we come to our meeting in August, we should know what a more formal plan that will come forward for adoption at some point in time. So that's all I need to say right now.
So as commented earlier, the police department did make a PowerPoint presentation. Sorry. The police department did make a PowerPoint presentation to the Public Safety Committee on June 17th, summarizing its final report, which was actually presented to council, submitted to council formally on June 18th at the meeting. This report is the response of the department to the external review and assessment of the racial bias audit. In their presentation, they identify the following action plan. And I want to highlight this for us because it's important for our calendar. The presentation to the Public Safety Committee has already occurred. Presentation to City Council has already occurred. The next presentation of the report will be made to the Citizens Advisory Council at its meeting in August. I believe it's the first Thursday in August in the afternoon. That is the next public discussion of that document. After that feedback, the action plans is to incorporate feedback as appropriate into the document, and then the development of a new strategic leadership plan. So when we meet in our next meeting, we should also have an understanding of what that conversation is. I would urge members of the commission to listen in on that meeting. And if you have not taken a look at the report, take a look at the report. The CPAC does have a public participation portion of the meeting, so there's an opportunity for that will be the first opportunity for citizens to address the full report. Is a 47-page report, and I would bring that to your attention, and that also would be an agenda item for our next meeting. Excuse me? I hope you're not going on vacation. Okay. Bonnie, anything from our work group?
I did some exploration of the South Carolina Human Affairs Commission. And essentially they're a government entity, and what they do is, I think, help throughout the state, mostly in state government, with complaints of discrimination in housing and other areas. And so they have this community relations board that some areas of the state have done. So Myrtle Beach and Columbia, I don't remember the other ones, Greenville. And I've got a document in a folder that is in our Google Drive that you can look at just to get some basic information. That's what I would recommend that you do. And it'll sort of direct you to look at becoming an official human affairs, what is it called? Community Relations Council. And as Adrian said, we could then bring in some other community organizations that are, representing the kinds of groups and people that we really want to coordinate with, but also bring in sponsors, and that may help us with the budget. They have a conference that they do every 2 years. And so that would be another opportunity for us to go to such a conference and meet with other people doing what we're doing around the state. The goals are very similar to what we are working on here. So I think it's a good idea probably for us to explore becoming an official human affairs commission. So take a look at that information and let me know what you think.
Questions, commissioners? Is it your intention for us to have a formal recommendation and action? Because as I understand the process, one of the options is for the city to bless an application for the creation, in which case we would then have to ask the city council and the mayor to pass a resolution in that regard. So if we decided if there was an action by this body by September to say that's the direction in which we wanted to go, that would create a calendar for moving forward in that regard.
I think that makes sense. Everybody can look at it, understand what it means. And I probably want to talk to Adrian a little bit more about it, because I think there's going to be some work up front that we have to figure out how we can get done, if that's reasonable. If the other commissioners want to do it. So I think talking about it so that perhaps next month or September we have an official vote is a good plan.
This wouldn't be the same thing as prolong it I thought we had a stumbling block, earlier last year sometime that we would end up having to have some sort of authority to adjudicate housing complaints. And that was giving the legal office heartburn, and
So
some of the council members heartburn, and
so that particular proposal had to do with the city's fair housing ordinance. And the question of the enforcement authority, as I understand from reading the material, the process of these councils, you can receive complaints, right? But the actual investigation would be conducted by the state.
Okay, so it's a much lower
Right,
level
yeah,
responsibility.
yeah, it was not, we're not asking for enforcement.
Got it.
Well,
Okay.
this
all right.
model would not ask for
Got it.
enforcement
Okay,
activity.
thank you.
Quick question about this. In the other cities where these community relations councils are active, are they affiliated with the city, or another local government body, or are they independent?
So there's two types. So there's one where you can be affiliated with the city. And then there's another one which is called non-partnership, where they're not. The difference, like me and Bonnie were discussing earlier, the difference is they are able to have partnership. I mean, they're able to have sponsorships. So you can go to your local bank and state where this council relations, and this is what we do. The only thing that I noticed is the difference between Park and looking at what some of the other cities are doing. Park touches like 7 buckets. And they're like Myrtle Beach, they have one, but they only do the LGBTQ plus community. That's their focus, human rights in that portion. Then there are those who only focus on racial equity, and that's their primary focus. So that's the only difference that I saw when it comes to that. But you can do non-partnership and you can do a partnership.
Thank you.
And some of them are county-based and others are city municipal based. So the question of what the partnership is. Anything from history, Bob?
Just that we got, as I understand it, twice as many plaques for the Black Wall Street because she got the money in time and they said, okay, we can do twice as many for that. So that sounded good. I told her I'd help her knock on doors to get them put up.
The other relevant part as it relates to history and culture, as part of the Open Data Day on June 28th, the planning department presented a storyboard on the
Morris
1931 master plan.
Morris Knowles story map.
The Morris Board story map. All right. And thank you. And it is the story map itself. 2 ways you can go. You can go right to the city's open data portal and look for it, or you can look at the city's Open Data Day. I would urge you to look at the Open Data Day introduction, at least the first half an hour, because it really gives you a good idea of what the project is, what they're trying to do, and the progress that they're making. And I point that out because the planning departments, the element in the community outreach and engagement component of the master plan speaks to engagement, all right? And I think the place where it's most evident, if you will, and most consistent is in this open data area. So to the extent that we think that's important, we should take a look at that. Right. I mean, if you do YouTube City of Charleston Open Data Day, 6/28, it'll pop right up. Okay. Okay. Anything else to come before the body? Yes.
Yeah, well, by way of update, not just about my trip, but I was out of the country for a couple of weeks. I got to spend some time in Israel, a place of a lot of focus and discussion right now. And I was really lucky to be able to have the experience of not just interacting with Israelis, but also spending some time with Palestinians and hearing very different perspectives and understanding just, and it's almost become a cliche to say this at this point, but just how complex the dynamics at play are, not just between Israelis and Palestinians or Jews and Arabs or Jews and Muslims, but also there's different sectors within the Jewish Israeli society that are that live completely separate from each other. And it's, anyway. No, but it was my first time going, I would say that was on a trip that wasn't like meant to, wasn't meant to like send me back to America as like an advocate in one direction or another. It was with a very academic trip. So it was lovely. But while I was gone, I was thinking a lot about the human affairs working group and what we could do. And I think a lot of the people that we spoke to have reached out to me and said, when are we going to have this discussion about how our communities are being impacted? And I would still love to do that. But in addition, in meeting with the Charleston Interreligious Council, who I've been a board member for a little while, but I'm joining the executive committee. They're very interested in working with the mayor's office, and not just here, but in North Charleston as well, on making sure that programs that are working between different religious communities are being uplifted and highlighted. So we're cooking with gas in a couple different directions, and it's all been, everything has been very positive. But I hope that we still can make progress on scheduling a discussion group. And I think all parties are, they're nudging me about it still. Like I'm getting text messages from the Charleston Religious Council members, the college students, the couple of college student leaders that wanted to talk about, that are both here in summertime. It should be indicative of their commitment. And I hope that we can
I'm
meet soon.
very hopeful that we can have a calendar, specific calendar, or some preliminary meetings and a specific calendar back at our August meeting. Commissioner Shoemaker indicated pretty much as you did. He thought that August would be when we get moving. It's almost August, so a nudge to you guys. Yeah, so at our last meeting, we did go through a portion of the ordinance in our task. We identified about 7 items that warrant a look at potential change in language. I highlighted those for you in the notes that I sent. Commissioner Snell agreed to take the lead. And I forgot who else volunteered. Was it you, Bob? To help.
Steven's taking the lead.
Yeah, to take the lead in drafting, coming up with draft. I thought you had volunteered.
I don't remember, but it'd be happy.
Okay, but you had. Okay, all right, so to begin with the notion of having those recommendations coming forward. Tom is taking the lead, and I'm working with him on the visit to community groups. If any of the commissioners have neighborhood or community organizations that you want presentations made to, please let us know. We can let Adrian know so we can get on the calendars.
I just had a conversation with Principal Swinton at Burke, and has to meet because we'd like to have the some faculty, students, student government come to one of our meetings once school starts.
Come to us.
Come to us.
Come to us, or us have the meeting there.
No, come here.
Great.
Come
That's
here.
great. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So we recall also from the meeting, there was discussion about ways in which the commission's nerves can be of assistance to Adrian. Adrian, I suggest that one of the things that you might do in your monthly report, okay, you jot your notes out to us and send them out and say, if there's some things that you'd like us to take a look at, that would help. And similarly, you guys should not be shy about sending potential resource documents that you think would be helpful for our education. Okay. Anything else to come before the body? If not, a motion to adjourn is in order. Moved is properly seconded. We'll stand adjourned. Thank you.
Um,